So welcome. I'm Dorothy Orzelak with the Institute for Business at the Global Context here at the Fletcher School, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone here this afternoon to our IBGC Speaks. I'm going to turn it over to Dean Bhaskar Chakravorty to get us started on what promises to be a really engaging and interactive conversation. We invite all of you who are online with us today to show yourselves. We'd love to see you in your tile boxes wherever you may be in the world today. Over to you, Bhaskar.
Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you for organizing us, and thank you to all of you for joining us on this Friday afternoon, which, if you are in Boston, there is a wonderful afternoon out there. So we appreciate your coming indoors and engaging in a discussion with Pete Groves and his colleagues from Publicis Sapient. I'm really looking forward to introducing Sapient to many of you at Fletcher, and we'll have Pete offer a bit of an introduction to the work that he and his colleagues do, and also introduce some of his colleagues. And then we'll have a bit of a chat about some of their work. And just by way of quick background, Pete Groves is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Transformation at Sapient. He leads the practice in life sciences for the company. He works with the clients to drive new growth opportunities through a number of different means, efficiencies and new insights gained through data and technology, and ensuring that effective companies change through the evolution or through industry evolution. He has had a 20-year career operating and advising information-based companies across many different sectors, and has developed a specific area of expertise in transformational change, workflow design, and execution impact. And prior to Publicis, Pete was a partner at McKinsey, where he led digital and data-driven transformation, was on the senior management team at Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund a little bit south of here, and where he led a broad-scale transformation from inside Bridgewater. And outside his work at Sapient, Pete also serves on the board of advisors for the Mailman School at Columbia, and where he co-chairs the Committee on Pandemic Readiness and Response. I'm sure Pete has been an extremely busy person, and hopefully on the pandemic readiness and response, we are all keeping our fingers crossed that it becomes just a tiny bit less busy. But with that, let's turn this over to Pete to find out what he's going to do with all the time that gets freed up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Bhaskar, and thanks, Dorothy. This is exciting to talk to everyone here. Look, I have two colleagues here too that are also alums, Jane and Babar, who you guys will hear from in a second. But our intention is to make this pretty interactive and not just a pitch to you. Although we, of course, are proud and excited about our company, we expect it may not be on your radar. It has some elements of a technology company, has some elements of a consulting company. I want to tell you a bit more about it. I think Jane and Babar could do a really good job of translating maybe how it connects to some of the things that brought you all to Fletcher and maybe the things you've done. Frankly, want to broaden the dialogue too about, what things you guys are thinking about and questions you have about what's either happening in the industry or what employers are thinking or talking about. We'll be as candid and open as we can be, whether it's about us or anything else, including, why did we leave the other firms we came from and things like that. Like any good presentation, I have a couple slides, as I know that sometimes that helps to show you, not tell you what we do. But maybe first things first is actually just Jane and Babar, maybe introduce yourselves as well. Your bio bullet points are up here on the screen for folks looking. But Jane, can you go next with your background and any inside connection here to the Fletcher team?
Great. Yeah. Good afternoon, 9 minutes afternoon, everybody. And thank you to Dorothy and Bhaskar for having us today. I'm Jane Fallon. I'm a Januarian. I think I officially graduated in 2013 when I completed my capstone with Rusty Tunnard, who was then at the helm of the consulting program at Fletcher. But prior to joining Sapient, which I did about 2 months ago, 2.5 months at the moment, I spent 5 years working in health and government at KPMG. And before that, was really focused in global health and international development through my work at JSI, John Snow, and USAID. I currently live in Maine with my husband, who knows Fletcher well, and then our two daughters who will, who might be through the doors there someday. I was particularly excited to join Sapient because of kind of the multidisciplinary lens that Sapient takes to this consulting work that you'll hear more about from Pete. I think people from Fletcher are kind of uniquely positioned to offer, a broad range of perspectives that may come into the engagements that this team implements. I would also say, something that, I was telling Pete yesterday, something I really credit Fletcher for me is I would never have been a traditional business school candidate. I was not interested in applying to a business program, but I really found a keen interest in kind of the business curriculum through my time at Fletcher, became a huge Jacques fan. And then of course, a major follower of Rusty and his work in consulting. But I credit Fletcher with, kind of sparking my interest in consulting that I've carried through the job I do now. So, grateful to connect with all of you and start to hopefully bring some of you into our team. And Babar, on to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, Babar, your turn, man.
Yeah, can you hear me all?
Absolutely.
Great. So first of all, thank you, Bhaskar and Dorothy, for organizing this and actually doing this. I'm very happy that this is happening. To make a small connection to the organization which was responsible for me to actually come into the private sector consulting work. My background is in traditional international development, nonprofit sector based out of Washington, D.C., pre-Fletcher. I was transitioning, was not able to transition. I came to Fletcher, did all the consulting, business track, finance strategy courses, and then started applying and got out into the market, which was totally closed because of COVID. But then finally, at the end of it, I was able to transition into Publicis Sapient. I have many offers and I'm a very recent grad, just to put that in. I'm a 2020 grad and not so coming out into the pandemic times. And I did have many options when I was choosing into an organization, but I chose Publicis Sapient because the language with which they marketed themselves and talked to potential candidates was very similar to how Fletcher speaks about their programs. Very diverse, very open, bringing your authentic self to work, and basically very high-end consulting towards transforming organizations. I think Pete is going to talk more about that. But I'm originally from Karachi, have spent time in 4 cities, Karachi, Lahore, DC, and Boston. That's where my life has been entirely. And I'm happy to talk to anyone right now during question and answer or afterwards if they want to ask more about my experience. Been at Publicis for 6 months now. Actually, day after tomorrow is my 6-month anniversary at Publicis. So we'll be able to give some fresh perspective if anyone wants it. Thank you.
Happy almost half anniversary. So team, from everyone from the Fletcher team here, we obviously don't have the benefit of going around with all of your introductions, although we expect many of you know each other. But please just lob into the chat if you want to ask questions or pause or go back or just raise your hands. It's a small enough group here that I think this isn't, everyone be as proactive as you feel comfortable doing. And from our standpoint, just to be clear, if you are interested in Sapient, none of this is evaluative. We're not trying to capture notes or any of that kind of stuff. So ask the dumb questions. Don't worry about it. We mostly will, just try to stay focused in this conversation. No one's trying to evaluate you in any sort of way, just to be clear. So we'll do a couple quick things here just to put a little more surface area on it. But first 2 things about really what we'll focus on first is who we are and what we do. And maybe throughout the conversation is why is this relevant to folks who are pursuing a degree like you are, recognizing that there's not really one through line that everyone shares. You might be all at Fletcher for a diverse set of reasons. Maybe just 2 topics off the top is I think everything is international relations and everything is digital. We say the word digital a lot. Fletcher says the words international relations a lot. But I would almost challenge anyone to find any business problem or any job that isn't at the intersection of those 2 things. Even to the point where I think we are going to stop saying words like digital very soon, the way that we stopped saying words like internet not that long ago. So a lot of our business is built around that and helping companies do those things. But some of the conversation we've teed up here and a lot of our client subjects that we specifically wanted to call out maybe speak a little bit more to an interest set that we think might be relevant to folks who chose a program like yours. But I would say, you know, particularly with everything going on right now in Ukraine, and as well as many other topics happening, basically everything is international relations and everything is international context. So that's a natural and inherent part of work that we do. If you are interested in companies and interested in businesses and interested in these digital themes, this can be an interesting place to do it. But we don't assume you already know what we are, other than maybe having looked it up, considering whether you're going to join this slot. We are a technology company. We have a bunch of different ways we help clients, but the core of our business is we build custom software and custom applications and things for largely corporate clients. We have a big public sector practice as well, but it is not the biggest part of our business. We've been around about 30 years. We are now, maybe 7 years ago, got bought by Publicis Group, which is a holding company of advertising and communications brands, which some of you may know if you know that space. Publicis Group has been around a lot longer, 100+ years. But Sapient has been behind and is involved in a whole range of things you may know. Sapient was behind building of E-Trade and many of the airlines apps and a lot of things, particularly in the consumer spaces, which is where Sapient was born when the internet was really becoming a consumer thing in the late 90s. Cue that sound of the modem connection of people dialing up to access the internet. That was really what was the birth story of Sapient. A few friends who had worked at other technology companies together wanted to band together and help figure out how to help people do things on the internet, the then very new internet. And since that time, Sapient's grown to be a whole range of other things, but there's about 20,000 people worldwide, offices in all the places you could imagine. And broadly, you know, kind of focused on what we now call customer engagement. And that can be a range of things, but you know, customer engagement from the standpoint of marketing and sales and those pieces. But I spend a lot of my time, Jane and I both work in health a lot. Barbara was just working with us on a health project too. You know, to help people make the right choices about their health. You know, from eat your vegetables to take your meds or whatever you need to do. But a lot of these things are really about engagement and communication and how do you stand out through all the noise that is in all of our lives. You can see across the bottom, we operate in a range of industries and a range of geographies that we can speak about in any direction folks want to take it. But generally, we help our clients do things that may look like other consulting firms if you've talked to them or you've heard similar pitches. But you know how we generally operate is at the edge of trying to ultimately differentiate and disrupt the spaces they operate in. Some of our big clients are more in the defend category. But the idea is, you know, broadly, how do we help everybody take best advantage of the many new exciting technologies and make sense of the even newer ones, like say the metaverse and Web3 and things, and places where they could possibly waste a ton of money until they have a plan of what they're trying to do. The way we do it and the sort of jargon we operate around is a good way of just getting a sense of, well, what are the jobs like there? And we talk about speed as a framework. So strategy, knowing what are you trying to do? What's the problem you're trying to solve, et cetera. The three of us are in the strategy group of the company. But we also have these other 5 major groups, or other 4 major groups of the 5. Product is, well, what are you trying to build? Oftentimes we would kind of be involved when there's an idea for building a piece of technology or doing something that doesn't exist yet. And, you know, there's a specific kind of profession of thinking that way. Experiences, you guys may have known or heard of companies like IDEO or Frog or those kinds of places. That is, we have very much that same capability. Many of our people in that group came from those firms, but it's experience design and experience strategy as a discipline, not just user interfaces and things, but what else is happening in that person's life? What is she doing as she picks up her phone? Are there kids around her or not? Thinking about the science of experience. Engineering, like it sounds like, is, you know, the software engineering through to data engineering and other pieces of, you know, making things. And then data and AI is a big part of what we do and how we operate, from strategizing around what is the data and and is it important? How can you use it? As well as understanding all the parameters, particularly important in an international context of what are you allowed to do, and different parameters of handling data appropriately. We talk about our business in 3 lenses. So this is maybe a point of just quickly building up. How is this similar or different to other places I've heard of? The strategy and consulting kind of capability and what we call the business priority, oops, priority spelled wrong, is priority, is similar to and probably common to the kinds of things you might see from other big strategy firms, right? And many of our people come from those places. But if it's quantitative and thinking about value at stake and company impact and all that, that's generally what that lens is. And the experience design we were just referring to a moment ago. But what's the moment? Who's the customer, and what is she trying to do? And what are the things she's not trying to do? So, to use a simple example. Many of us had to schedule vaccine appointments in the last couple of years. I didn't really want to talk to anyone. I didn't actually care whether it was CVS or Walgreens or anything else. I just wanted one place to find out where I could go and how short the wait time would be. Those kinds of things are what we factor into that discipline and that lens on what we build. And then in engineering and data science, all the kind of capabilities, as well as the downstream thinking of, do you want to own this? Do you want to manage it? Do you want to have someone else manage it? And for a lot of our clients, that's the more confounding part. They'll trust us on how to build it, but they're worried about, carrying downstream some complicated thing they don't know how to operate. We think we're better and more fun than a lot of other places. I can just speak to this on a personal level. You probably saw from our bios, I was at McKinsey a couple times, actually. I was there twice. But I was a partner there and really fond of McKinsey and had a great time. I think one big distinction, though, is McKinsey doesn't really do this kind of work as much. McKinsey does more core strategy and advisory work, but this more kind of hands-on digital make stuff and kind of scratching the creator's itch was something I tried to do inside McKinsey and had some success doing. But when an opportunity here arose, I came and jumped at the opportunity to be in a place that was more natively a creator company. And however, we sort of play, and maybe good news, bad news is we think we have some role against those same things and can be compared to them. Bad news is, of course, we compete with all 4 categories of companies, which are lovely, wonderful places, and sometimes make our business model more complicated by trying to explain that we can do things just like those other groups in different spaces. And I think only 1 or 2 slides here more, and I'll pause for a second. But the kinds of things that we do, just as an example, and the kinds of things a lot of companies are facing right now really fall into these buckets. We are not doing things on the cost cutting or the merging, those kinds of consulting projects. We're really doing things about what do you want to do and how can you do them better with technology, data, digital, all the different phrases that relate to sort of more modern approaches. But some of it comes down to just, in a really kind of collaborative way, helping define priorities. And as you may have found in your old roles and where you came from before coming to Fletcher, often what's hard is choosing among many good ideas. And so sometimes that is a hard and subjective process of figuring out how to eat the elephant, as the saying goes. What are the things we can do first, and how do we get started? Because there's so many things we want to do and so many ambitions. And then these things in the light blue are really, kind of what those problems often fall into. And the red one's an interesting call out. Some of the work that we get pulled into is really thinking about what's next, what's over the horizon. All of this attention around the metaverse, or even things like 5G that came up in the last couple of years, beg a lot of questions. I think, frankly, a lot of our clients and a lot of companies don't know what to do with those topics, and don't know if they are, a whole lot of nothing, or if there's something, but they feel irresponsible not doing something. And so we'll get into situations where clients say, I need an AI strategy. An AI strategy to do what? What's the thing you're trying to do? And those are the kinds of places we try to help them unpack what it is they're trying to do, and bring them examples and other leadership of how to get it done. All right, before we get into cases, we have a couple case examples, but I'll just pause there for a second and take the slides down. to see faces. Are there any questions or Jane and Babar, anything else you'd comment on as we frame up who are these people and why did two Fletcher people go there?
Yeah, I can speak to it. A few things which made me, after the hiatus with the pandemic, where there were no job offers, there was nothing. I had 3 offers, and amongst them, I chose coming to Publicis. One thing was the entire focus of the company, like Pete mentioned, business transformation, looking at consulting from an innovative point of view, and the firm being startup and like led by people who are from the top consulting companies who've come in here and created a startup environment. Those are the things I found out from my public research and the conversations I had. So that was something, and I wanted to go into a consulting firm. And I heard about like lots of nightmare stories as well. Like you work 24 hours and then again 24 hours and then again 24 hours. So one of the things which they made very clear in the interview process as well was that, we really value work-life balance. And you will barely get any calls after 6 p.m. for work, unless it's like a crisis mode. And in the 6 months, I can testify that has been my experience. We work very hard from 9 to 6, but barely do you ever basically take work home to the weekend or the evenings and stuff like that. So those things came across and were very appealing when I actually compared what was being offered. And then my personal interest in digital technology and how it's influencing business was obviously there because I had a background in digital fleet management for a company I worked in South Asia, in Karachi. That brought me here. And so far, the experience has been that, it is a place to learn, it is a place to grow, and it is a great place to enter into consulting and develop a career if you have a global mindset, which most of us have coming from Fletcher. So I'll stop there.
I would just add one thing, and I've been reflecting on my Fletcher experience and how that applies here. But I think as Pete was saying, we're a management consulting firm that's operating across a number of capability groups within Publicis Sapient and then Publicis Group more broadly, and we're working with both our management consulting colleagues who are typically an architect that we know, but we're working with a lot of different types of people all over the world. All over the place. And I think, my Fletcher education, likely helped prepare me uniquely to be able to, get to know, the culture of our customer experience CX&I team. I don't know that acronym yet, I'm too new. Or our engineering team. Customer experience and innovation. There we go. But I think that capability to be able to both know your craft and know what you're bringing and what the seat you're filling is intended for, as well as to really kind of reach across boundaries and work with all different sorts of people is something that Fletcher people are uniquely positioned for here.
Great. Dorothy, Bhaskar, anything else you guys want to comment on here, or is it useful to just illustrate through a couple cases and then pause for other questions?
Yeah, perhaps I can ask a question at this point, Pete and Jane and Babar, as you reflect on the surface area that you cover at Sapient, and kind of goes back to the original premise of strategy, which is
right.
You pick where to play. And I'm wondering, as you look across the kind of the entire range from strategy to design thinking to product development and engineering to data, and then getting the feedback from data and then folding that back into strategy, and then the cycle continues. Where do you see the kind of the primary point of differentiation for Sapient, and more significantly for people who work at Sapient? I mean, what's their what's the strongest set of skills that you look for, as you look through that entire arc?
Yeah, it's great question. I think that one of the things that is helpful to me to kind of keep anchoring in is really, at the end of the day, this is a technology company. We work for an engineering company. Out of those 20,000 people, 17,000 are, engineering type profiles. And what I think is really interesting, I mean, even Bridgewater was a little bit more like this for me, where, you know, most of the company is really investors and investment engineers of some kind, where the strategy brains and the folks that came up through business school or McKinsey or those kinds of places are actually more rare. That's really what's true here too. And so I think the kind of thing that we are excited about, and I think for Jane and Babar and me makes the job fun, is we are really operating with a different kind of archetype from many of ours, and helping them unlock and figure out how to be, more ambitious in the kinds of things they're imagining, designing, et cetera, and running sort of a translation layer between what our clients want and what our, you know, really kind of deep and robust technology teams can make and do. And so the job is, I think in many ways, is about a really thoughtful and rigorous and disciplined translation of what's possible and the applied science of making it happen. So as I was referring to, like, we make things, we build things and test them out, and they actually hit the market every day. And so we also get a really strong signal back when they're not working. And so one of the differences to me from the more traditional consulting experience to this one is we put our work actually in the water, so to speak, all the time. And so you can actually, what's really exciting and exhilarating is when it's going well, and you can see and even, you know, show your mom the thing that you built. But the flip side of that is it also is very apparent when it's not working or is broken or no one's using it or those things. And that was not as easy for me to see and have kind of a tangible feel for when we were doing really almost more like corporate services to corporate, you know, kind of C-suite, so to speak, right? You had a very small blast radius of the people you were helping or affecting or whatnot. So I think part of what we, in conjunction to the sort of translator type ability and the both interest and capability to work with diverse sets of people of diverse sets of topics, we really are looking for and excited about ambitious, passionate people who want to put stuff out there and who want to make things and want to see them in the wild. That is not for everyone. We recognize, but I think that for me has been a really rewarding part of working for really a kind of modern technology company with some of these personality traits of the consulting firms we came from, is that union of some of the strategic thinking, but really the applied science of, you know, our products are getting hit by the real world every day.
Great, that's great to hear, Pete. Could I ask one more question, then we can, go
of course
the examples you have.
Of course.
In addition to what you work on and what kind of skills you draw upon, this second question has to do with how you do the work.
Yeah.
So there is kind of one model of consulting, which you will recognize from your McKinsey days, which is you spend a lot of time in a highly collaborative mode with the clients, and you're there in their windowless conference rooms, and you're there for quite some time. And of course, the pandemic has sort of reshuffled a lot of that kind of working. And I guess I'm curious about how work at Sapient was pre-pandemic, through pandemic, and post-pandemic. And just also tying this back to Babar's comment about work-life balance and some of these other issues.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll comment first, and then Jane and Babar, please also chime in with your experience. So I think two things are maybe I break the question in two parts. So one is kind of under normal circumstances, how are we operating and what's the work like? As you can see behind me, sort of some of these agile, lean startup kind of things. The nature of the work is really at its core some stage of software and digital development and whatnot. So we do these agile sprints and some of these ceremonies, if anyone came from that kind of work, of stand-ups and backlogs and things that are not so far afield from the way the kind of more classically consulting hypothesis-driven work happens. But there's a lot more sort of multi-discipline structure to it, because we have experienced designers and engineers participating early in the discussion of what's possible and what's been done and all of that. So there are structures of how to do that work that is fun and interactive. And I think maybe one big difference is the nature of our teams and the nature of maybe any technology company like ours is a lot more heterogeneous than the big consulting firms, right? McKinsey on a certain level is a great business because it's also really simple. There's like 6 jobs for the most part, right? And they're all basically just, leveling that's advancing in more or less one major career path. As we showed in that speed diagram, there's really 5 major disciplines that are materially different from each other in our work. And then to use the T-shape analogy to do some of this work and put all this in production and actually, deliver real things, it's not prototyping and wireframing it. Our T-shape people need to be really deep in the vertical of the T, because you need to know how to put stuff out in mobile native apps and how it needs to operate in different geographies, et cetera. So what it changes from the nature of the work is there's typically more people involved. Just a sheer N of people on the phone call are involved in a collaboration. Our job in this strategy group that might be most relevant for the team on the phone is really orchestrating and pulling folks out of those different disciplines to contribute and participate in a healthy way. So the way we work has some of that structure to it, and then is really, as I say, is kind of a pretty active team sport to keep people involved. We were already pretty remote or work from home, maybe comfortable or work from home friendly from the outset, because the work has multiple disciplines and because the work is kind of inherently global in a lot of ways, where we source people from and whatnot. We were already pretty well wired to not be in a team room together. Part of what what Babar was referring to is, we don't actually travel to client sites nearly in the way or the volume that others do. Because in part, we have 12 or 15 people working on a project from different locations. It doesn't make economic or logistical sense to all try to co-locate. So we don't do it in our own offices. We don't do it at our client offices. We, of course, go to major meetings and whatnot. But the nature of the way we work was kind of inherently remote friendly from the outset. But I think what's really accelerated over these last 2 years was not having really the option to co-locate forced some other things to get better. So how we actually document things, how we use Teams and chats, and whether it's Slack, or we happen to be a team shop, but any of those technologies, we had to all basically get better at and a little bit more rigorous about how we use those. I would say that the counter to the remote work life element that I think some people frankly struggle with is the work is effectively always on because the sun kind of never sets on our team. So there is technically a chat thread. If you had your alarms on, or if you had the ping sound on, it would ping all through the night because something is happening. Sort of, the nature of our work is still evolving, typically around the clock. So part of what we've really tried to do, and part of the culture we've tried to set up, is really just embrace, hey, when you're off, you're off. Declare your boundaries and say what you need. We have some people who like working noon to 10 p.m. or whatever, and we have some people who like working the opposite of that. And generally, it's okay. As a culture, we kind of don't care and make it very output driven, as opposed to we need everybody in the team room in Cleveland on Monday morning. Jane and Babar, please chime in with your own experience on that. I'm largely speaking for myself and speaking around intent, but keep me honest if it's not how it's playing out for you.
I'll say something, if Jane will allow me to go first. Is that, like, as an introvert myself, I detested the group work we did at Fletcher, like every group work. And I was like, why do we have to do it with 3 people? And I always used to think, I know everything. Why do I need to talk to 3 other people to do this Excel model or a financial statement analysis? But at the end of the project, I realized, I didn't know everything. I've learned a lot from the other people. That was a great muscle building exercise for what I experienced at Publicis. So we work in groups, whether on Teams or mostly on Teams, since I've been there 6 months and everything is online. That experience of Fletcher working with groups, dealing with different personalities from different backgrounds, different level of seniority as well at Fletcher, because there are no people from all backgrounds, all different ages. Even military fellows were part of my groups when I did like my corporate finance course. So those things really helped and made it easy for me to transition into like a group where I met very different people on my first day. And I had the experience from Fletcher of doing that. And I'm not saying this, and Dorothy knows this, that, I'm just telling you from my real experience. Corporate finance, financial statement analysis, communications, the law courses I did, the different people, the group work, every assignment was not submittable unless everybody had signed off on it. And that's the way we work here. And it became very nice for me to actually go into flow with that. So I just want to say that work-life balance, as well as this the skill we develop working with everybody, is super useful coming in here.
Yeah, I'd agree, Barbara. I think for me, I have always struggled with this travel issue since the earliest days of my career. And before, when I worked in international development, I'd always say, why do I have to travel halfway around the world for this? Like, this could be a phone call. I've always thought that the Monday through Friday consulting schedule makes it really easy for the team managers. You can be pretty lazy about orchestrating your team when you just force everybody to be there and sit together. So I think it's taken a little bit more thought from our leadership team and from the people who are running our projects every day to make sure that we are communicating and orchestrating inputs from team members. It requires a little bit more advanced planning and more thoughtful approach to that. But I'd say, for me, it was a major pull to bring me to Sapient 2 months ago, because I know at least KPMG and a lot of the big consulting firms, the party line right now, at least when I left, was, of course the world has changed, but we're waiting to see what our clients are going to do, and if our clients want us there, we'll be there. And for me, I knew just moving forward, that's not the work life I want.
Right. And I found we had a good kind of candid conversation with some of our clients about this too, because some of them and their companies are coming back. And we sort of asked, like, you guys want us back? No. I think generally, it may be a little generational, and maybe also depending by discipline and whatnot. But a lot of the digital native clients that we are working with, they don't care either. And they joke about, like, we don't want you guys, working in basement conference rooms either. So I have found that everything's really fluid. I would say that there's a skill gap though at the moment that I would say, Jane and Babar have probably heard my shtick on this before, but I think we need to get better at not just, thinking collaboratively, but literally using software and tools in different ways. Like Teams is great, but it has some limitations. Zoom is great, but it has some limitations. We're trying to get better at things like mural boards, voting, using all the different things that you can do to make remote meetings way better than live meetings, candidly, except for the fun of, like, Jane and I went out last night after a day in New York together. Those things are hard to replicate, but the actual productivity of this meeting may be really enhanced by the ability to pull up slides, put down slides, have a chat on the side, vote on questions, and be able to make decisions in a way that's actually harder if it's 25 of us in a round table room, right? There's all kinds of things like that I think collectively the profession is slow to get good at, but this is one of the things that we are trying to make, frankly, a real enhancement of the way we work, and candidly allows us to have a different talent strategy, right? If we had a different office policy, I don't think we get Jane. Jane wants to live in Maine, and she is a really involved parent. And, like, I think if we had a different approach, I don't think we get people like Jane. And so this, writ more broadly, is, I think, a really wonderful opening for us for a whole range of people who may work in Nebraska and not really be on our radar from the campuses we go to and all that. Or maybe they're in campus in Boston right now, but want to go home to Nebraska or all the other equivalents around the world. Fantastic. And so we're hoping we can make good on that. There's some logistical challenges to it, but that's my sense of why I left my old firm and came here. And I think a really, frankly, kind of maybe next era of how we think about work and how we think about collaboration. Any other, I'm just looking for the chat for other questions, but I can also show you some more cases and stuff of the kind of work we do. Before we close, we'll also talk about, if you're interested, how to apply and all that business. But here, really want to be supportive to you too. Each of Jane and Babar and I have been on the other side of this phone call many times.
Yeah,
Emily, you have your question up, and so do you, Reed. Shall we go to questions?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Just to pop one in, and Bhaskar, thank you. That was really helpful question. And Pete, thanks for the answer there. For someone who might fit one of the subcategories at the bottom of the slide that you mentioned, but hasn't had consulting experience in the background, can you kind of talk a little bit about transition there, what that would look like for someone with that profile?
Yeah, absolutely. We really embrace and are excited about people who don't come from kind of like traditional pipeline backgrounds. I think there's a sort of like groupthink and almost like reflex that those places train, which is largely really good, but sometimes can make people not terribly independent thinkers. And so the first comment is, it doesn't count you out. We don't have anything like where we expect you to spend 6 years at some other firm or you're not a candidate. Even Babar's own background didn't look like that to us. Jane's background had KPMG in it, but we were way more interested to ask her about all her international development work. So I think for one thing is we embrace that and think it's great. Number two is, I'll show you in a minute here, we try to do a mix of training and kind of helping you learn things on the fly, as well as just exposure and what we call apprenticeship. Sometimes apprenticeship is like a cop-out word that just says, I don't know, we'll drop you in and you either learn it or you don't. But we try to do thoughtful staffing and pairing of people and all of that, so that you can close those gaps. I think the primary thing really is like will and intent is at least 51% of the equation. If you want to learn these digital topics and you want to learn, Web 3.0, it's not that hard. Like I was a poli-sci major. I'm now a digital guy. It's not that big a deal. But I think wanting to learn and wanting to do that is a huge part of it. I have found that some people we've recruited kind of self-identify overtly or covertly as I'm not a digital person and kind of do this to those topics. And I think that's a bad ingredient, or I would just say like, this isn't the place for you if that's how you feel. But if it wasn't in your background or for a number of career reasons, it hasn't been part of your exposure and you're really interested in pursuing it, no real issue. Some of the other trades outside of strategy and product kind of just require, it's a little bit of a faster moving stream in a more esoteric way. So to jump in as an engineering hire is a harder thing. To jump in even as experience design, although we probably all think we know a lot about experience design, our group is a little wonkier and academic on that topic. So that's a harder thing to just jump into without some exposure to it. But candidly, it can play out with, you can take an entry-level job in that group and work your way up through it quickly. But there's nothing structurally that blocks you out.
Great. Reed, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Pete, Jane, and Bauer for being here. I kind of had a question about how your clients have received this end-to-end approach that you offer, right? You do the consulting, but then you hand it off to another team for implementation. And has this level, now that accountability is available to the consulting firm, how has this sort of changed how you guys operate compared to McKinsey, where you were?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the places where clients are taking us up on it, it is largely going really well because like you said, we kind of have to eat our own cooking. Whatever strategy we're leading with or how we think about solving the problem, eventually it'll rear its head in how we engineer and put something out there. We're even getting to a spot now, we'll show you in a moment, we have some things that are looking more like joint ventures or things where we'll also share in some upside if it goes well. I think the hardest thing in all honesty is that places like McKinsey and BCG and whatnot, they really benefit from more than anything, I think, deep, long-standing relationships. And they're well-earned and well-deserved and all that. I should say and be really clear, I'm very fond of McKinsey and very proud to have been there and all that. But I think one of the great advantages they have is a level of trust and a level of repeated exposure at a human level that is maybe more important than the blue card with the blue logo is, the senior people there have worked with a lot of their clients going on 10 years, 15 years. We are a much younger place, newer place. And even, some of us, like we said, have been here for less than 5 years. So the nature of some of these client relationships are just frankly a lot newer. And so I think our primary barrier that frankly, we just have to earn is the trust and repetition of we can depend on those people and we can depend on those specific individuals, which I think a lot of people are open to, but just don't know yet. So anyway, I think it is largely, proving itself out, but we have to keep earning it the way that we go. But I think clients very much like the idea of being able to have one partner, one kind of exposure that has, we have the accountability if it goes well or doesn't. I would say for those that came from this space, I don't know which of you have this background. One counterpoint is procurement offices don't like it. However, a lot of your CFOs and procurement offices kind of generally want to keep a lot of different horses in the race so that you're not too dependent on any one. And so that no one group has some perceived leverage over the company. And candidly, this is like part of what procurement offices are, evaluated on. So I think there is a natural, you have to be somewhat creative because there is a natural boundary where you can't have too much of a client's kind of shared accountability in many of the places we operate. They're just not comfortable with that. They want your creative agencies or your technology firms to be, sort of deliberately balanced.
No, thank you.
Well, if there are no other questions right now, why don't we dive into some of the work that you've been doing? Because there's some really cool examples, Pete, that you have lined up.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. I'm going to do a very quick version of these because I know these can drone on forever if you're on the other end of this. We love talking about our stuff, but I'll do a sort of a 1-minute version of 3 cases, and then we can pause and talk about them. And then before we wrap, we'll make sure that anyone who wants to know, knows about how to apply and all that business. So one is, this is for SBM Tech. So this is Siam Commercial Bank out of Thailand. But this is now a payments platform in Southeast Asia that has gotten a lot of attention and really ramping up because it operates as a joint venture between a major bank and a major technology company. This is, again, some of these things we thought would be interesting to this group because they operate at the intersection of a lot of dynamics, right? In that part of the world, you have a number of country-specific platforms like the well-known ones in China, but I've learned, I didn't know as much about this, but there are many other equivalents in the other geographies. And the nature of frequently traveling or kind of international families and international consumers that, bounce around across those geographies, often find themselves having to manage 6, 12 different apps. The nature of having a common shared platform, helping SCB really get into the space in a more central way. This is something now that, we've been behind and actually carved out as a different kind of read like your question, kind of a shared accountability. If you are interested to follow up and read about it, you'll see this is like a joint venture that actually has shared upside. We get some fees from it as a client project, but most of it is all downstream of whether it works or not. And what's been fun here is that's the kind of thing that the Sapient leadership is excited about trying, excited about doing. We're a lot smaller and frankly want to stay smaller than some of our bigger competitors and have the ability to do some of that. The governance is kind of simple to be able to green light things like this if they feel bold and ambitious and whatnot. I'll just give you the 2 others. So another one you may have heard of, Neom is one of these sort of cities that's sprouting up overnight. This one's in KSA in Saudi. But Neom is, may look like Dubai here a couple of years out. And they're a client of ours really from the travel and hospitality side, really from the idea of almost a traveler's experience side. What is it like to come to visit? Is it a single experience? And learning from, a huge range of other cases or points of inspiration of travel. What would it be like to come visit or come to Neom, particularly for people who may be thinking about or planning from far away, but had never considered, frankly, taking a vacation to Saudi or to this newfangled city that they've only seen online. So this is a customer experience piece, but on a number of different levels is interesting and complex, not the least of which the client being the KSA and the big real estate outfit building Neom. Number 2, kind of the overt, we want to do something incredibly disruptive, doesn't exist anywhere else. That sounds super fun and, kind of snatched from sci-fi books, but it also has to be practical and, frankly, intuitive. So the mix and union of those disciplines coming together. Again, to the point that Bhaskar had raised earlier, what we think is really fun is we'll be really used by real people very soon. And we're already in user testing of a lot of these things and seeing if our strategies and hypotheses are true or not. And then third one, and we can pause, Novavax is, some may know, is a vaccines company that has actually been around a long time, but had never commercialized their own product. They usually license stuff to others, but they had been sitting on a very interesting and compelling vaccine for a coronavirus that didn't really have a market until about 2.5 years ago. When COVID hit and Operation Warp Speed money hit, Novavax made a significant strategic pivot to try to bring their own product to market and become a more household name in vaccines. So this has been a really interesting, I've been really close to this one. This has been a really interesting and fun experience. Novavax is probably less relevant to the US and some other established vaccine economies and is probably going to be a lot more useful in other middle and low income countries where you don't have the refrigeration capability, you don't have some of the other elements that make, kind of the COVID vaccines many of us have viable here. So this has been a big, frankly, corporate affairs, marketing, digital customer engagement, all of those kinds of capabilities to, number one, make everyone aware, but also, as they've had a million delays in getting approved and the many different complexities as this thing has dragged out, keeping the conversation new and fresh and not just kind of marketing and resending emails, but having a very honest conversation with the market about what they're doing and how they're doing it. But the pace and the speed at which this happened had to be digitally native, had to be centrally controlled. There's, as some of you may have been exposed to, there's also a million controls around what you can and can't say about medicines that change country by country, which is fun. And is a lot of how we've been building this digital strategy and digital transformation for them. So I'll pause there and take the slides down again, but those are just 3 vignettes of the kinds of clients we serve at any given time. And at any one of those 3, a mix of what's the problem you're trying to solve, a level down unpacking of, what's the outcome you're trying to get, and then thinking through and strategizing around what are the different ways to possibly do it.
Great. I'm wondering whether there are any questions from the room based on what you just heard from Pete about the 3 client examples that he mentioned, or any other questions that popped up in your mind about the nature of the work and the content. So while people are thinking, let me just sort of ask a couple of questions for us to sort of ruminate on. As you reflect on the last 2 years, today is the 2nd anniversary of the WHO declaring a pandemic. So, and not that the dust has settled, but it has settled a little bit more than, a year back, or certainly 2 years back. And I think we can all remember kind of where we were when we decided, whether it was at the university or in an organization that, the way we were going to do our work is going to change. And at that time, many people thought it was just going to be for a couple of weeks and then, we'll be back. And with a shock, we realized that it's going to be much more than a couple of weeks. And people were talking about, 2022, perhaps as the earliest, when things are going to begin to look like normal. And everyone said, no, that's just too pessimistic. And here we are, 2022. Right. So I'm wondering, how have you seen your clients sort of internalize this notion of separating both the human element and the organizational and the capital and other sort of the hard equipment, the hard assets that they have got, and dispersing it, and primarily connecting everybody through digital means. And how have clients themselves adapted, and where do you see? And I know this is such a broad question.
No, it's great.
I'm wondering whether even through 1 or 2 examples of some of the client work that you've done, that people, are now beginning, 2 years hence, beginning to kind of figure out a new way in which they are organizing themselves internally and also relative to all the other market participants they work with.
It's a great question. I'll do the same thing, Jane and Babar. I'll start, and then please comment on your own experience. So I think it has played out differently for sectors and subsectors. Some candidly have really thrived, right? You should say up front, a lot of horrible things through COVID and through quarantine, and on a personal level, a lot of really terrible outcomes. However, for some of the sectors of the economy globally, this has been great and a proof of certain business strategies. So one interesting point is some have thrived and done really well, and some have not, depending, maybe intuitive or maybe something you read about all the time. But let's take, for example, Marriott. So Marriott is a great example of a company that almost overnight lost, I think it was 92% of their revenue just dropped like from one day to the next day, right? And because of so much of their business is also very short term, right? It just, there wasn't like a tail on it. It just, their March 2020 revenues just dropped like a cliff and then nothing. What it forced for them, and that was incredibly difficult for them, and they've gone through a lot trying to figure out, how to bring that business back. But it also forced to them almost like well, we've got to get, much more proactive about some of these things that have been on our rainy day list. It's a rainy day. Let's go work on this thing that we've helped them with called Homes and Villas, which is like their, Airbnb competitor. And however, in a number of important ways, they're figuring out how not to just have an Airbnb competitor. But what was interesting, and it was, frankly, a mixed blessing for them, was they, of course, figured out how to tough it out and capital structures that allowed them to endure the really hard hit they took to their core business. But it forced a more digital native, more kind of diversifying strategy to the forefront of from the board to the C-suite to everybody in the business. And I think we're really fortunate to be, their trusted partner and help them do all that. On the flip side, I was at the time, actually, literally when I guess it was 2 years ago to the day, I wasn't even thinking about, but was serving Estee Lauder, the cosmetics company, who had a very similar effect, at least initially, because so much of their business actually happens through airports and through travel retail, right? So their stores in New York are mostly actually traveling tourists, basically. And so much of their business actually runs that way. So they also had one of these immediate fall off a cliff, not quite as dramatic as Marriott, but they also then had to strategize and think a little differently about many other things they could do more natively and could be doing, for example, to do a more direct to consumer or local to China business strategy, because those Chinese travelers were not coming through Heathrow and not coming through JFK and other places where they, kind of formed more of their relationship. So I think there's been a forced innovation, which has actually been a positive, although, with many other negatives to COVID, a positive thing. And then the digital spaces we operate in, I think it's also just proven or validated this is possible. My own wife is a psychologist, and I think if you asked her in January of 2020, could she see all of her patients by Zoom, I think she would have said, no way, it would never work. Well, they were forced to figure it out, and it works. And that's true of a whole range of healthcare. And some of the challenges that were happening in healthcare was that just wasn't reimbursed. Could we actually talk to our doctor or dermatologist over Zoom? Of course we could have, but Cigna and Aetna wouldn't pay for it in January of 2020. So it forced a level of kind of unlocking in the business model that I think is here to stay, and a really positive thing. But that is playing out differently in different spaces, based in part on almost a forced proof point on digital can work in ways maybe we were reluctant to embrace. Jane or Babar, do you have other comments or other ways to connect this to some of maybe the way the Fletcher team might be listening here for things interesting to them?
I was just going to add, Pete and I were in New York yesterday and heard a chief marketing officer talking about, I think she's been, for her career, kind of feeling an uphill battle toward pushing towards digital in a very traditional kind of media oriented field. And, I think for her, she really experienced firsthand the overnight transformation that can happen, that happened during COVID. And, has said, with the company she was at the time, never would have considered it itself an e-commerce company, and became one overnight. There's so many, I'm so into Shark Tank that, there's so many of these right. Digital pivots that have happened, but I think it became in many ways a proof point of our capability to change and change on a dime. And really, I think for a lot of our clients, the idea that, it's almost become like a non-issue or a non-point of discussion. Of course, we're a digital first company, and it's our face to the world now. I think in healthcare, it's also been, just as Pete said, really particularly interesting. In healthcare, the term digital front door is frequently used. You have your brick and mortar, the door to the hospital, the door to your doctor's office. And I think where seeing increasing investment, even, after the ACA, when the government funded a lot of the transformation in the healthcare space. This idea that your doctor's office, it's not just a physical door anymore, and that's just, accepted. It's amazing that this happened. 2 years is not a great deal of time for these major transformations to have taken place.
Those are right.
I just have a mini example. Basically, I was sitting in my Somerville house in Packard Avenue doing my capstone when the pandemic hit. I was thinking of getting out of university and, taking over the world. But we were told to go back home, shut the doors, and sit in front of the computer for any classes, even at that point. I was doing my capstone with Mall of America, and we were doing like a digital loyalty program solution for them. And just like a month before, I'd actually flown in to meet with their management team, sponsored by Fletcher, our trip, me and a colleague of mine from my Fletcher class. And we were glad that we'd done that. And the conversations we had in February with them were very different from the conversations we had in May with them when we were submitting our PowerPoint and our recommendations to them. They said, what you're recommending totally applies and totally is good for when we discussed in February, but suddenly the world has changed and nothing's really happening. The mall is pretty much shut down. Retail has gone down. We're talking about digital strategy, loyalty. Nobody's coming here, getting out of their houses. So how's it going to help? So we were directly impacted. But they did accept our proposal because it was based on, and we did graduate based on the recommendations we gave, because they said this is totally applied in February, but March onwards, we even don't know how we're going to basically reshape our business. Mall of America being one of the biggest malls in America and entertainment complexes. But the experience was great. It was a great consulting exercise. But when you talk about how things change, Bhaskar, and you mentioned, that was the thick of things that Josh and myself were dealing with when we were writing our capstone for Fletcher.
Great, thank you for those observations, Babar, Jane, and Pete. And while I'm waiting for questions from the room, I have another question, which is, as you sort of think about the muscle memory that has been built up over the course of organizations. I wouldn't exactly call them digital native. They're like digital refugees, kind of being forced into digitizing so many aspects of their operations. And now, as you kind of look ahead, where do you see the balance of the role of technology in kind of the majority of your clients? Is it towards using digitization for efficiencies, or is it for new market growth, innovation, or as you said, disruption, if I recall one of your frameworks?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think it's all those things. I guess my concern is I think too many of our clients are talking about things like data or capturing first-party data without a real sense of what they want to do with it. I think one of the I felt this in my old firm too, but there's sort of an inclination to not be counted out of certain things, which is very different than trying to be good at certain things, right? So just as a simple example, one of our clients is a consumer health company that, in addition to other things, they make vitamins, they make pain medication, all kinds of stuff, but, sort of things you get in the aisle from a health store pharmacy. And toothpaste is among them. And they're talking about their first party data strategy for toothpaste, to which I'm kind of like, what? Why would I share anything with my toothpaste company, right? And by the way, even if I were, what exactly are you going to do with it? And I think there's something good there, to be clear. I don't think they're actually completely on the wrong planet, but I don't think it's really well thought through. I think you get sort of, almost like a reflex handed down or passed through. We got to have a first party data strategy, and everyone needs to figure out how our websites are going to scrape more information and plant more cookies. And to me, on some level, feels like somewhere between a waste of time and something I don't want to work on. But there are things that can be really exciting. And so we've talked about and steered some of these more towards, well, with better data, what would you do? And they're talking about oral health as a broader category. Why are kids not brushing their teeth, or what happens down that could be interesting, and that's an interesting topic. But before you have us going down building websites that scrape people's information, let's be thoughtful about what you're trying to do and where it's going. So I think that's maybe one of the more important things and more important roles we can play when it goes well, to shape and kind of sharpen the aperture of what problems you're trying to solve, because it can all be done. But at the moment, I would say maybe way too much of our collective, global GDP is spent on trying to advertise better and more often. And way too little time is focused right now on literally building or deploying a better service or a better product than what came before. So we like, and that's why we put in the upper right our disruptive thing. We like trying to steer our clients down towards disruption, not necessarily to blow themselves up, but to really try to just keep rethinking and keep evolving what the category is. So for Marriott, broadening the category, and I think they would agree, not to be the hotel room business, but in the travel and experiences business. And in some cases, we just want a painless conversation or a painless travel experience. I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to go to bed. I've been traveling all day. That's the problem to solve, right? Those kinds of things I think are wonderful, perfect problems to try to think about with digital and data and things that can make it better, as opposed to ways to cross-sell me, whatever, a bike.
Great, thanks, Pete. Let's go to Reed, and maybe the last question, and after that, I'll hand it back to you, Pete, to just share some information about what people might want to think about if they'd like to apply to Sapient. Go ahead, Reed.
Yeah, so I work in medical device, and we're always decades behind, right, in technology and where we are. I work in a SaaS business, and this is considered frontline technology, which of course has been around for a really long time now. And I was curious if you guys have found these past 2 years have accelerated these older regulated industries into the digital age because they needed to transform, or are they still kind of hanging out with the dinosaurs?
Yeah, I do think there's a bit of a forced disruption of some of those same regulated elements too. So just in health, right, the FDA has had to figure out, not just because of COVID, but just the acceleration of the planet, how do we figure out how to accept data-driven clinical trials that are not, pills in people and see what happens, right? That's a thing that has been a topic for probably 30 years, but now is hitting a tipping point of it both being possible, more confidence that it's safe, all kinds of other elements that maybe are a positive perfect storm of confluence events that makes that possible for that kind of an example. And even just this example of, it wasn't per se regulated, but the nature of insurance companies not paying for a Zoom psychology session, but they would pay if it was live, and not paying for, a Zoom consult, but they would pay, but no one really preferred to go live and go pick up my kids' forms for school. Those things have been rethought in this context, and I think now maybe just forced on the edges. There's also, Jane and I actually briefly had this conversation last night, particularly in the healthcare space, this unfortunate kind of tortured evolution of data privacy and what was originally intended by HIPAA versus how it's kind of played out to be almost like the conversation killer for anything innovative. Is something that I think is still unwinding. There's too much data and too much Wild West and not enough governance to oversee that it won't be used well. But my sense is that is happening quickly. Clearly, people are starting to see that more in the markets, and anything like financial services and what Robinhood exposed. Those kinds of things, I think regulators are getting savvier about, and maybe getting a better sense of how do we start making things more fluid and more possible than they were.
Interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So I know that we are about to bump into our time. So Pete, if you want to share any information that would be helpful for someone who would like to follow up.
Great. Let's bring it home. I think, I'm not in presentation view. So I'll skip the why this place is great. But another place this is great is also a company that really deeply values and has put a lot of effort behind the many different elements of inclusion. The career progression is fast. We're growing really fast, and frankly, we want to do better than some of the firms we came from. This is not a stay 10 years and wait your turn kind of culture or company. But part of what we are trying to create here is something that accelerates really quickly for people who want that. many training opportunities and places to grow, just like the good question earlier in the conversation. We do focus a lot on the job learning, but a formal development focus and training pattern here of at different stages. We don't expect everyone to stay for life. We want you to do a couple good years and at least have the option to either re-up or the exit velocity to go do other awesome things you're excited about. Much like I'm sure how Bhaskar and Fletcher feel about your time in Boston. Matt, you want to hit any highlights here over these last 2 pages about the actual process for folks that are interested to go further?
Yeah, sure. So I think we have a position for the senior consultant on the Tufts careers pages as well, but obviously you'll find a bunch more jobs that are open on our website. So I'd encourage you all to go and have a look and see what kind of roles check that box in your mind. What really gets you going. If you want to reach out to anybody here, Anna, who's also on the call, and myself would typically be your first point of contact, particularly for the MC team. If it happens to be a different part of the business, we can certainly put you in touch with somebody else as well. In terms of the MC team, the process that we go through is, I think, relatively industry standard. So we have a case interview and a competency or behavioral interview for your first round. And then the second round is a second case study and then a final little kind of closing interview as well. So case studies will be fairly typical traditional case studies. So if you do get invited to an interview, go off, practice them, and it's an interactive experience as well. You'll have plenty of opportunities to ask the questions along the way, and the interviewers are really good at guiding you through the case. And it's certainly not a there you go away and come back and present. It's very interactive and a very good experience as well. So that is probably the things I wanted to highlight from that, but encourage you all to go and just have a look on the careers page and see what you can find.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And maybe 2 other comments too is rolling starts. We have, basically starting classes every month. We're not trying to have everyone start in September or whatever. And a pretty geography agnostic approach. We have places where we have more people and that might be more fun. But to my little anecdote about Nebraska earlier, we're really trying to make good on that and make it true. And please, if it's not right for you or maybe someone else, send anybody our way. We are growing really quickly and really excited about diverse, non-traditional profiles. We hope you'll mention to friends if you can.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pete and Matthew and Jane and Bobber for all the terrific background you've given us on Sapient. I'm sure you piqued our interest in both the company and the work that you're doing. If you have any questions for us, do let us know. I know that we have run out of time, but if there are any particular questions that you'd like to raise in the next couple of minutes, we can do that, or we can have a follow-up conversation.
Absolutely. Just a big thanks to everybody here. We know there's a big investment of time and you probably had a lot of options for your lunch hour today. So thanks for giving us a shot.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Great to be with you all.
Okay. Good to see you. And back to you, Dorothy.